The hover, the skill that sets helicopter pilots apart, and what makes them so uniquely versatile in the air. The key to helicopter flight is mastering your ability to control the helicopter. One of the very first things you'll do in any flight is hover, which is arguably the most control-intensive part of a flight outside of emergencies. The ability to master a hover begins with the understanding of the controls. The cyclic pitch control, or the cyclic, is the flight control directly in front of you that essentially chooses the direction you will go. The cyclic controls the pitch of individual rotor blades through their rotation. Ultimately, this changes the angle of the rotor disc, in turn moving the helicopter in the direction the stick is moved. The collective pitch control, or the collective, is the flight control that essentially makes you go up and down. The collective controls the pitch of all the rotor blades at the same time. Raise the collective when you need to climb, and lower it when you need to descend. Keep in mind that increasing collective will increase power demand on the engine. Anti-torque pedals. The pedals exist to control the tail rotor pitch. Essentially, they control the helicopter's ability to yaw left and right while at low speed, and can be used to keep the helicopter in trim during flight. The name anti-torque is given to the pedals because the torque of the main rotor causes the helicopter to want to spin opposite of it. The tail rotor counteracts the desire to rotate, therefore anti-torque. In our case, the rotor system on the Kiowa rotates counterclockwise or to the left. This means if you were to take off or raise collective without any pedal input, you will begin to spin to the right at a rate that increases over time and becomes less controllable. Therefore, you should expect to need to start with more pedal in the direction of your rotor system. If counterclockwise, in our case left, you will need left pedal as you lift. With clockwise, you will need right pedal as you lift. This exists in a hover due to a few aerodynamic principles that you really don't need to understand to play a video game. If you're interested though, you can look into translational lift, translating tendency, and effective translational lift. The best way to achieve a smooth liftoff and begin to understand how a helicopter will hover is to slowly increase the collective. Every time the helicopter wants to move away from pointing in your desired direction, either by turning or pulling front, back, left, or right, stop moving the collective and hold it where it is. Then correct the helicopter using one of the two remaining flight controls. Once stable again, hold the control you used to correct the movement where it is and continue to raise the collective. Do so until you have lifted from the ground. This will help you locate the helicopter's sweet spot. However, be warned, in more advanced sims, this sweet spot will change based on your weight and balance. Once you've gotten the hang of this, start intentionally moving left, right, forward, and backward, and feel how much input it takes to move and stop the helicopter. Take a minute and watch the cyclic here. Observe how when an input is made to move in a direction, shortly after an opposite input is made to correct it. This counteracts the initial input and regains the hover. Use your pedals to rotate left and right and feel out the sensitivity and observe the torque readings. You will see in this helicopter as I input left pedal it requires more power. This goes back to our discussion before about the tail rotor counteracting the torque of the main rotor. Therefore, if we want to turn left, it requires more power as we are overpowering the main rotor's torque. To go right, you will need even less input as the helicopter already wants to rotate in this direction. The number one issue you'll run into while learning is called stirring the pot. You will find that you begin to overcontrol the aircraft the more you focus on hovering, and that is caused primarily by two things. One, your hand-eye coordination and your balance. Think back to when you were a kid in gym class or preparing for a sports game. Whenever you would balance on one leg to stretch your quad, or if you were trying to just be a flamingo one day, what did you likely do with your eyes? Most likely, you looked in one spot to maintain balance. This is the same for helicopters. You choose a reference point out in front of you and essentially lock in on it. Your goal is to maintain the distance and keep the object in the same general area on your windscreen. When you're first starting out, you can have a pretty wide area that you want to keep it in. As you become more advanced, you can make the area you want to keep the spot more and more confined. When you are beginning to master the hover, look at an item in the distance in front of you, and as you're landing, never look at the ground. Number two is over-controlling the aircraft. The biggest problem people will have while in a hover will be over-correcting the aircraft. Let's remember, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. If you notice the helicopter begins to move to the left and you correct with right cyclic, you will need to also put in some additional left input to find that balance point again. Always make slow, deliberate movements, and most of all, relax. As you focus more on the task of hovering, you will tense up, and your motions will become more exaggerated. When you go to land the helicopter, fly through the landing. What I mean by this is don't just give up and lower collective once you are in a low hover. Slowly lower it and continue to focus on your hover until you are no longer airborne. Once you feel that you have the hang of hovering in a specific area, get out and move around along delivered paths. In this case, I'm using the taxiways. As you continue to practice hover taxiing and following pathways, you'll discover that you start to think less and just let the helicopter do the work. Fun fact, hover power is takeoff power. If the flight model in your game is properly modeled, once at a hover approximately 3 to 5 feet off the ground, you should be able to pitch your nose forward and gain enough airspeed to begin a climb out without ever touching your collective again. Now let's quickly discuss in-ground effect and out-of-ground effect as it applies to hovers. In basic terms, you are in-ground effect when you are within a rotor's distance of the ground. What this means is if you removed your rotor disc and stood it up, that is the distance you would technically be in ground effect. In most cases, when hovering around an airfield, you will only be 3 to 5 feet off the ground. In-ground effect requires less available power due to the physics of air in conjunction with the ground. Out-of-ground effect removes ground from the equation. To achieve an out-of-ground effect hover, you will have to keep in mind that you will require more power. Depending on the environment, this may not be possible. As you enter a hover out-of-ground effect and you begin to slow down, remember you will need to gradually increase collective to avoid going into vortex ring state. See my video here explaining vortex ring state and how to recover from it if you want to keep learning. Otherwise, thanks for watching and hopefully you learned something new today.